Be one with the Zerg. Let the creep flow through you and enter the mind of Neuro, a Zen Zerg player who, by combining his pro poker experience and a cognitive science background, has become StarCraft's foremost professor of mentality and mindset. He's even written a book. What makes Neuro unique is his approach to the game. Holistic, balanced, and mindful. These reflect both in his personality and playstyle. But how do we take advantage of the Tao of the Zerg? Well, to find out, I sat down with the sensei to learn how to just play like Neuro. I am super excited to have as my guest Neuro. Neuro, welcome to the show.
What's up, sir?
I want you to do me a favor. I would consider you, and if I was to introduce, obviously the mindset and mentality player is, the moniker that people throw around. But let's say you're on a dating site. How would you describe yourself? Like a StarCraft 2 dating site. How would you describe yourself in that bio?
I would say that I'm something like a mindful athlete who has a love for forests. I would say I'm very focused on the mind. Brain science was my background and field of study in university and whatnot. Flair for the theatrical, did musical theater and that kind of thing. And if we're on a dating site kind of thing, I wouldn't really have restrictions for other people's belief systems or that kind of thing. Mainly just people who would want more of a conversationalist approach to dating. I think conversation is one of the most rich ways that we can exchange with one another, whether you're with someone who's very attractive or just a friend. Those would be kind of the main points for me.
Yeah, I feel like communication is paramount. I think it's something that falls by the wayside a lot when it comes to connection with people. But you mentioned cognitive science and your field, your study. And so what was the conversation like in your head when you made the decision to study cognitive science?
Well, I accidentally stumbled into cognitive science from psychology. Cognitive science is a newer branch of brain science. Psychology has been around since the 1900s and before. I was in the psychology degree track and I was meeting with my advisor and she said, "You do realize that you graduated 2 years earlier with a cognitive science degree?" And I was like, "What? How?" I went to university early in a program in Texas and they load you up with a whole bunch of math and science courses. So I had like honors biology, physics, chemistry. I had a bunch of other math courses. Like you stop gaining value from additional calculus past like calculus 1 in psychology, but in cognitive science they really count all your math credits. So she was just telling me that I'm way further ahead in this degree plan already. So I just took the Intro Cognitive Science 101, and it was one of my favorite classes I've ever had because it specifically talked about a lot of mindfulness regarding like skepticism as a trained skill of receiving information, but then waiting before you pass judgment and just trying to investigate what's really going on here and to not necessarily trust your first instinct because it's not always correct. And then another main department that was very eye-opening for me is judgments and decision-making and cognitive bias. So the different mental shortcuts that human beings take that served us well in a state of nature. If you're in a hunter-gatherer kind of situation, those are shortcuts that are going to save us time and energy. One of them that I mention a lot is credulity, where you tend to trust what people tell you just at face value more often than you distrust it. Because if, say, you're in a tribe and someone says, dear God, there are 8 bears that are going to run over there and eat us. The people who said, well, wait, let's consider this claim, they got eaten by bears. So we've sort of been selected to just listen to each other and just go with it.
At what point do you lead into really using those sciences into other endeavors? Poker, for example, you were a poker player in when you were playing. Did you play professionally poker?
For 2 to 3 years. Not like I'm the glitz and glam if I have like $1 bajillion and running around and stuff, but no. It was the grinder approach of going at the very smallest stakes of poker where I'm playing for pennies across 6 tables, $20 to $100 in an account. You can do that. And then you just gradually increase the value over time. And then you manage your bankroll and whatever you have on that account, that tells you what tables you can sit at. So you don't want to sit at too big of a table because then you don't insulate yourself from what's called variance. Variance is just the natural ebb and flow of probability of good luck and bad luck, and how even the best players, they're going to have big downswings due to variance. So you want to make sure that your money that you're sitting with is large enough that the variance can ebb and flow and you won't hit zero.
So what parallels can you draw between StarCraft 2 and poker?
Incomplete information is the really big one that chess doesn't have. in common with StarCraft. You can't see what your opponent's hand is, just like you can't see your opponent's base at the start of a StarCraft match.
Right.
And the way that you scout, you can scout in poker. You scout by betting. So by betting against your opponent, that puts a piece kind of in their area that puts pressure on them, and the way that they react to that bet is a way that gives you some information. So if you bet and they fold, then you figured out that they had a very weak start. If you bet and they check, that means they're probably, or if they call, they're probably a weaker player or they don't know what they're doing. If you bet and they raise, they likely have something very strong or they're very aggressive. So you can get more and more clues about an opponent based on how you bet against them. And one of the main concepts that I talk about for both StarCraft and poker is table image. And table image would be how other people perceive you, what you're good at, and what your kind of tendencies and styles might be. And that very much applies to StarCraft. So you can have a hyper-aggressive player at the poker table where they just love raising people. They have the better hand about half the time, but they're really spicy to play against because they just want to raise the pot and put pressure on people and make them sweat. That's kind of how they have fun and how they approach the game. So you would want to think about what is that style and what are the limitations and downsides of that style, and how can I play a counter style to that. So if someone's hyper aggressive, you can play for really big value. Whenever you actually have a legit hand, they'll oftentimes take it all the way to showing the cards and going all in, so you can really get a big payoff from them. But you don't want to mess with them too much because they're unpredictable and they have a really wide range of hands. Conversely, if you see someone at the table who's super cautious, they're super defensive and careful, that they call that a nit, you can oftentimes bet over them and they'll fold a lot of their small blind and big blind to you, so you can just get a steady stream of small revenue from them because they only play the very best of their hands. And if they do play against you, they have something really good, so you should just get out of their way. StarCraft is a lot like that, where you've got a defensive player like the nit. They're very careful, they're very protective of their stuff. Just take the bases. You can just expand and consume the map. Let them have their little safe corner and you do your thing. If you're against a hyper aggressive player, then you just build up extra strong and sturdy and safe. You make sure you never cut any corners with your defense, and they're going to be crashing like waves against your castle, kind of a thing.
Have you done a mapping of like the amount of archetypes of StarCraft 2 players?
No, but that sounds like a fun exercise. I do have a spreadsheet called the Book of Cheesers, which it's kind of like that. Whenever I did my first road to GM, one of the things that I started doing in High Masters was I would take a few notes on my different opponents that I had, because there's a limited number of players up there, and it's kind of like a musician, where a musician doesn't practice all pieces of music for their instrument an equal number of times. They have like their main bread and butter, the stuff that they've practiced the most. And whenever they do those builds that they practice the most, it's crisp, it's refined, they're not supply blocked as much, they're hitting you faster, they know what they're doing, and they also know how to adjust if things get kind of scuffed. If they're just trying a new build that they don't normally do, it's going to be pretty haphazard. An example I would give would be if I'm facing a macro Protoss, someone who most of the time will try to get their third and fourth bases, they'll try to get big upgrades, do harass and counterattacks and stuff, and just play a standard macro game. If one of those players cannon rushes me, they've done the cannon rush fewer times than I've defended a cannon rush, so I have the upper hand there. The flip side is, if someone cannon rushes every single game against Zerg, they may have potentially done that more than I've defended it, so I may want to consider opening with the safer build.
I imagine you have to get tells from people. What are the tells in StarCraft 2 that you can easily look for across players, builds, personalities?
The tells for what kind of style
they
go for?
Yeah.
I think it sort of depends on where they really enjoy playing the game. So you've had guests Ruff and Prinef and Florencio.
Yes.
I know a bit about each of them in terms of what they think about when they want to approach the game. I've talked with Florencio, and we met at BlizzCon once, and he was saying that he plays StarCraft like he is YOLOing for someone's queen in chess, where it might be a bad move to take the queen and you lose too much to get it. But if your opponent is upset that they lost the queen and now they have to play a queenless game, oftentimes they just start making more mistakes because they don't really know how to react to that. So he wants to put them very far outside of his comfort zone and create chaos so that he can thrive in that chaos. A player like Ruff, for example, he likes to make the stronger army. And whenever I'm playing against him, he's usually getting battle cruisers up and trying to keep that count going, and he'll try to get a really strong mech army and that kind of a thing. And he doesn't really like the rapid mechanics of like setting up all your base cameras and trying to do tons of multi-prong back and forth kind of thing. The Legacy of the Void, like really fast macro mechanics format, is less appealing to him than having a sequence of strategy that allows him to have control of the game.
He did not like that at all. He was not a fan of the Legacy of Void changes at all.
Yeah, I would say in that aspect, I'm pretty much Ruff's opposite, because I kind of like to play fast, mechanical, and I wouldn't say dumb, but I don't really care too much about like bamboozling my opponent. I like to play in a way where, and this is partly due to streaming, even if they knew what I was going for, they couldn't stop me. That makes me feel like I'm really strong if I'm able to create that kind of a game.
Would you then describe yourself as a person that likes to cornered all the options, that you've played the optimum game?
I would say to revisit the poker terms, I like to play solid, and that's a style that is unexploitable. So you see what the style is, and there isn't like I can counter it with this. You will simply have to proceed with a well-rounded, also solid approach to the matchup.
Would that be then, for a sense, that you see it as you have removed as many weaknesses from your play and your opponent has nothing to exploit? And so you are less likely, you're not necessarily going to look for exploitations in your opponent, but your opponent needs to match your tempo because you have no weaknesses, if I'm trying to wrap my head around.
That's my main style. The way that I would also mix it up is using another poker term, balancing my range. So if I hatch gas pool against someone, sometimes they'll start to skip their worker scout against me because they'll be like, Neuro, he's adorable. He would never cheese anybody. Right. That's when I'll 14-14, and I'll get some lings out across the map early, kill a couple workers, set the opponent off balance, and sometimes get pretty far ahead doing that. So I do have some tricks up my sleeve because I know what my table image is. I know my table image is the guy who's never going to cheese you and is always going to give you a nice macro game. So if I do a best of 3, or if someone's been cutting a bunch of corners against me, I will change my build.
Right. So keep them off balance in the sense that they're reading you, and you know that they're reading you, and you are making sure that you are able to switch up the variances and your variables based on how, they're falling set in their ways, essentially, and taking advantage of that. I like that. Could you tell me about a time you had, and I want to bring up poker again, a time where you had an aha moment in terms of playing poker, like an epiphany of how cognitive science and thinking and reading people all come together?
I did have a major moment that was it was more like getting hit by a truck, but it was good. So when I first got started with poker, I had the I'm hot shit problem, where I thought I was hot shit, and then I was like super smart and I could just crush and win anything, and poker was a game, and I was like gladiator in WoW arenas, so I thought I was hot shit. And I loaded up the account, and I was 4-tabling downtown Vancouver. I was in a coffee shop just with my laptop. I'm playing these tables, and I'm just losing, and I'm losing, and I'm losing. And this is maybe $20 worth of stuff, so I'm not breaking the bank. But this is 4 tables, and I'm sitting here for hours, and I'm losing and losing and losing and losing. And I'm thinking, I can't be this unlucky across 4 tables. Like, what is going on here? Am I bad at this game? And I just felt crushed, soul crushed at the end of the day. It wasn't even late, maybe 4 p.m. I just collapsed in the hostel bed where I was staying and just sleep super early because I was so sad. And I resolved to wake up in the morning and just read some of the poker forums and see what people were talking about. Fired up my laptop in the morning, went to 2+2 forums, and I didn't even know what the words meant. And that was a really enlightening experience for me because it showed me that you can achieve top 0.1% skill in something, like gladiator, or you can be the top of your class for your grades. You pursue another domain of skill, some other game or field of study, you are a tiny noob who is shit. And I didn't know nothing about the game. I didn't know what they're talking about with initiative, position, value advantage, like talking about the hero and the villain is how they describe yourself and the opponent. I was completely and totally ignorant. So it was kind of like I got hit with the bus of my own ignorance, and I realized it to its full capacity. So when I went to StarCraft, I already knew that I was bad. So it wasn't as crushing for me. I had it more of a serious, like, I'm going to get my pencil and paper. That was my mindset going to StarCraft. I'm laddering, I lose a match, that's going in my journal. Because I just figured out some build that attacked me, and that felt really strong. So if I can figure out how to beat this build, that's another maybe 3 games per week that I'm just going to win because I understand how to beat this build. So I approached it much more like a student rather than like an entitled person, which is what a lot of gaming culture is plagued with. Many people will be told, and we're kind of the entitlement generation because we had the self-esteem psychology was really popular when we were getting raised, which is you're great. Yeah, you want to be an astronaut, you can be an astronaut. You want to be a lawyer, you can be whatever you want to be, which is partly true, but also it misses the whole point of it's the consistent daily effort over time that is exceptional that allows you to grow and to advance your current situation. So you need to work really, really hard too to succeed. Yes, human beings are magnificent, but if you want to really like be competitive and surpass other people, you have to be doing something they're not. So I think we got partially misled with that, but every generation has its memes. Yeah, so that's kind of ours.
That's every generation has their memes. And does that become sort of being aware of one's own ego?
You should be aware of who you are, what you want, and what you perceive your role in life story to be. Because some people will fancy themselves like they're the savior of their friend group, or they're someone who's going to change a whole bunch of stuff, or they're going to be a leader, or a king or a prince or whatever. They have their own kind of idea of how they fit into the overall social and narrative framework. And one thing that became really apparent to me through brain science is that the way that our brains are adapted and evolved to work in nature is pretty different from the world that we see today. History and prehistory, we were working with social groups of like 20 people. Maybe you're in a big tribe that has 40 to 45 people. This whole like mass media, 300,000 people playing StarCraft at a time, like that's who you're competing up against. These numbers makes no sense to us, really. If you actually lined up all the different people on the StarCraft ladder who you're competing against, I think a lot of people would understand the gravity of like how hard it is to actually climb just because of how many people are
like a visualization
there. Yeah. A lot of these things aren't intuitive to us. So it's really important to kind of take a step back and think, what is my actual situation here? And what are my edges? What are the key things that I'm doing different that are allowing me to advance when there are a lot of other gifted and talented people, especially in the StarCraft scene? I had this thing from university where we did some fighting, intramural fighting in the after hours. We did boxing, and there was nobody who was as fast as me. So I fancied myself a very fast person. And then I go to StarCraft. Holy shit, it's all fast people. You get into like GM. I face certain players, like I've played against Zest. He eliminates me from the America's Open pretty often. Man, it's very humbling. So I feel like this journey of getting into the StarCraft ladder, it's been very refreshing and humbling for how many amazing people there are. So in another sense, you could say it gives you a lot of joy for just what humans can do. It's pretty cool. We have a lot of talent and great minds in the scene.
If someone is humbled like that, is there a possibility to lose motivation, to be a little bit almost nihilistic in the way that it's like none of this has a point to play? Did you ever have a kind of an idea? Like you overcame that and you've thrived and you've been able to see the value. Is there a thought process for someone to be able to overcome that? And when you come up, because a lot of times when you build that ego of yourself and it's shattered, there's almost like a bottoming out moment for a person. How does one cross that chasm and get back into the space where they want to, compete on the ladder again, be in the tournaments again, or, show what I'm not awesome. Here's how I move forward.
Yeah, that definitely applies to me in the sense that I went through school first. A lot of people who are StarCraft pros, they went from high school to pro StarCraft, and then they think about going through university. So
right.
I didn't play StarCraft 1 and I did university, and then I started playing Heart of the Swarm beta. Like that's when I really got into it. So I felt extremely far behind pretty much the whole time. And my mission hasn't been to be a competing tournament player. My mission has been to bring a conversation about mindset and tilt management to esports and Twitch. So being GM was a way for me to demonstrate the principles that having a strong mindset is an advantage over Masters players to get you into GM. So that was kind of like, it was the fulcrum of what I'm really trying to build up here. But I didn't really have the the sights set on being the top player. I will say that there are aspects that I wrestle with, like sometimes I get knocked out of GM. My MMR just dips too low and it resets every day. So maybe I have some bad days and I'm out of GM. That feels pretty bad. And as a content creator and as a player, there's a lot of, I don't know if I would say pressure. There is pressure on maintaining a certain level. People perceive you to be a certain level of skill, and sometimes that's either lower or higher than you actually are. But it sort of feels like you have to maintain that level to maintain their respect and that kind of thing, this is all kind of internal thoughts regarding it. And that's based on a lot of the comments you'll get, YouTube comments about why you're not better than you are. Have you thought about competing in tournaments? This kind of thing. I do play in the Monday America's Open, and I have my Samurai streams on Tuesdays where I do a lot of try-hard stuff. But in my content flow right now, I have Dungeons and Dragons, I have World Discussion and Foreign Policy on Sundays with Agent Smith, I have Philosophy Time. I main tank for a classic raiding guild, and I'm the guild leader for that. So I have a lot of other things that are also running in tandem, and that sets me behind in time for other people who are like really competing to push rating. So I would say I have a pretty sober mindset with all of it. And the thing that really drives me is, god damn, StarCraft's so satisfying. Like when you have a really good game and you fight someone who's at your level or even slightly above your level and you beat them, like beating a player 200 to 300 MMR above me in a macro game, no other video game comes close to that. There's a wide gap between how much it feels like you did this. Like you can crush a Dota 2 game, maybe you crush mid and then you get really fed and you go clear the other lanes and your team ends up winning, but they did play a hand in your success. StarCraft ladder match, that's all you, and it feels really complete and fulfilling just for the way of the warrior, which is another aspect of kind of philosophy and thought that I've drawn a lot from with Bruce Lee and the Miyamoto Musashi that I read on stream sometimes, just talking about using competition and using fighting as a way to improve upon yourself. So self-improvement is really the goal here for me, and trying to improve the conversation in the scene.
First of all, I'm trying to think, where do I even want to pick that apart, in the sense that Miyamoto Musashi, Bruce Lee, Way of the Warrior, is that something that is replicable for all players? Is it accessible for all players to be able to take into their game and play and embody? Or is there just a certain level of mindset that gifted people may be able to obtain?
No, the Way of the Warrior applies to everyone. I would say it's about knowing your true self, like who you actually are in that moment as a competitor. It means putting your abilities on the line, just trying your best, throwing yourself into battle against an opponent, and then letting the outcome be what it is, and bowing to your opponent in respect at the end every time, even if they cheesed you, and then trying to learn something from that and keep your chin up and your chest out and your shoulders back. Just having that forward momentum for yourself. You can be Silver League and you're practicing the Way of the Warrior if you approach it that way. It's not about results. It's not about like, once you're this certain level of skill. If I can rant about something really dumb, it's the that's not good enough crowd. There are some people who they'll always put the goalpost a little bit further than you are. There was someone who was going off in the chat about not even being GSO Code S round of 8. They were saying that if you're GSO Code S round of 16, they're not really that good. But round of 8, then you're decent. And it's like, geez Louise, that is the most absurd like skill barrier that you're setting for what's impressive to you. Heck, if you're a platinum player and you take out a diamond player, that's awesome. And don't let anyone tell you that's not awesome. Those people are pooper scoopers, and they just want to be grumpy about stuff, I guess. But you should be able to celebrate your victories along the way. I used to be a bronze player. Back in Wings of Liberty, I didn't have any RTS experience. There were cannons in my base too, and I was scared and I didn't know what to do. And I was pretty upset because I'd never been in the lowest league in a game before. But you try to play another match, and then a friend sees you upset and he says, hey, do this 4-gate thing. And I was like, what? And then I jump up 3 leagues.
When you're that noob in your scrub, how do you know what you don't know?
Some of it is trial and error, just being in the space and trying to get a sense of the mechanics. And then you've got your friends you can spar with. So the thing that I would recommend is, if you can get people who are about 1 league above you, say you're Diamond 2, you can spar with Diamond 1 people, or even maybe 2 leagues above you. Just getting a sense for the matchup. You'll be a little bit weaker. You won't win the majority of the games, but I feel like you end up learning a lot because you can almost do everything that you want. And that's just enough to kind of spur you onward to try to get those timings a little bit faster, a little bit cleaner, and your opponent can start to hit at some of your openings. And I think it was Bruce Lee that he was saying that your opponent is a teacher who points to weakness in your play. So you could treat it that way, where I'm looking for people who I can learn from. I'm not doing this to inflate my own ego. I'm doing this so that I can learn the matchups. You do customs against them. And then just talking about builds and strats. That was something that was more common when Wings was at its peak and pretty much all the esport people were playing StarCraft. But yeah, just asking people, what are you doing in this matchup? Sometimes I'll fall behind my peers. Say I'm a mid-GM Zerg. There are other mid-GM Zergs. Some of them will have a drastically higher win rate than me in a certain matchup. And sometimes I'm just approaching it from a way that's dated and not really as effective with what opponents are doing. So theory crafting and talking strats with some other Zergs.
Do you have a ritual for practicing before entering to a high pressure scenario?
Hell yeah.
What is this ritual? Can you share me your ritual?
Well, I try to do it before my samurai streams. So the ritual starts the day before, and that begins with a good night's rest. That's probably the best thing you can do for yourself. I feel like my critical thinking, my speed, and everything is just way up. My accuracy is way up if I sleep. So I try to go to bed at a reasonable time. With my telephone, not in the room. Sleep hygiene is pretty key. You fall asleep faster if your phone isn't there distracting you with all the dank memes. And you also get out of bed faster because you're not checking your email in bed and all that kind of stuff. So that would be another key step in the ritual. And ideally, I get some exercise either the night before or the morning of. I'll go for a 5K run. Nothing that's going to destroy me and make me exhausted, but enough that I get my heart pumping for a little bit. And then I'll have my breakfast and coffee and water. And then I'll sometimes do some shadow boxing. One of my nice pump me up bands is Death Grips, actually. Ooh. So sometimes I'll just put that on, get a little bit hyped up, jazzed up. There's also the All Might theme. That's kind of a power up for me from My Hero Academia. Yeah. All Might. That's the name of my commentary account in StarCraft as well. So he's one of my favorite characters. He's kind of like Superman with actual depth and vulnerability.
Do you ever like scream plus old chop before something?
Oh, daijoubu. Does it hit? Watashi ga kita. Yeah. Yeah, symbol of peace. That's another thing that I try to represent as well with the Twitch and streaming, and just like the energy that I bring is I want to bring an attitude and a presence that respect and righteousness are awesome, because I think All Might really shows that. Like, he represents justice, safety for other people. Villains run and hide. He's just way too strong, kind of a thing. So I sort of see my villains as the people who badmouth me in chat. They are saying nasty stuff, like basically poor conduct in the esports scene are kind of the villains, and I'm trying to be the hero who's swooping in and saying that we should respect one another and treat each other well is like the primary thing, and that's more important to me than my results on a given day. So I get pumped up, listen to some music, jump up and down a little bit, and then I'll do a aimbooster.com just mouse accuracy trainer, just try to click a bunch of stuff, get connected with my mouse hand, and then I'll do an empty custom game warm up. Sometimes I'll put a very easy AI in there, and I'll just try to get 200 supply before I have an opponent harassing me. And the way that I've described that practice is StarCraft is kind of like two people like dueling pianists. They're both trying to play their piano piece, but there's a rule that you're also allowed to slap the shit out of the other person. So you're trying to play your piano piece and slap the shit out of them. But
that's the best analogy in the world.
But a lot of people will never just practice their piano piece. They're always practicing it when someone's slapping the shit out of them. So they don't really get to just in a neutral, like safe laboratory environment do their build. Because your build is going to be quite a bit better if you don't have Reapers and Hellions and Adepts jumping into your base. You can practice that, try to get it good, and then once you've memorized it and once you practice it quite a few times, then your opponent can come in and try to set that off balance.
This is something I've always had a huge problem with, and I've never really I've wrestled with this a lot. How do you measure progress? Sans the ladder. How do you measure progress?
Sometimes you don't always make progress, but that's not always a bad thing. When the last year and a half with COVID, it's been more hold fast and try to survive. So a lot of people, they're not looking at their bank account and saying progress. They're not looking at their like social life and saying, yeah, progress. They're saying like, I'm hanging in there. That's okay too. So sometimes progress comes, and sometimes maybe you do backslide a little bit, and then sometimes you maintain. Those are all kind of part of the ebb and flow of how you navigate through life. I will say that a lot of times you get kind of hooked on these Instagram and inspirational kind of posts where people only show their best side, and it looks like they're just succeeding and making progress every day. But I think it's misled, because I think a lot of people do have the days where they're just a lot lower energy. Maybe you had that creative thing that you were going to do, but you just didn't do it, that kind of a thing. So I think progress is something that comes more in waves and in spurts rather than is totally consistent. But for me, progress has been moving up here. I moved to the Seattle area and getting set up by myself in my own place, able to do this all full time and then mix in additional kinds of content. So progress for me has been having a D&D show that's been running for over a year now with Pig, Apoptosis, Ash, and Cobra Venom.
I've watched a little bit of that.
That's really fun. I would say that's the kind of content that, to me, it's so rockin' and fun and amazing. It's not raking in tons of money, but it's something that I believe to be genuinely good and that I want to create. And that's its own kind of progress that isn't money in your bank account, but it's something beautiful that you added to the world that you feel is fulfilling to you. So I think a lot of progress can be pursuing fulfillment and just finding stuff that you consider to be worthwhile, and how that's maybe the ultimate goal, really, is to live life in a way that you consider it to be meaningful and good.
And I feel like I can pull these strings and put them on someone who's thinking about StarCraft and not focusing on the goal of raising their MMR. How does someone frame that kind of idea of putting something, just doing it for the sake of doing it rather than the reward? How do you approach that mentality, shift the mentality for someone who's playing on the ladder or playing StarCraft in general?
So the way that I would use StarCraft as a tool for kind of self-growth would be that it really challenges you to figure out a rough plan, to be faced with chaos and disorder and a bunch of bad stuff going on, and to respond to that in a way that is as correct as possible, where you can develop more faith in yourself. So for a lot of people who feel kind of lost and they don't really know what they want to pursue, what their purpose is, all this kind of thing, there are different ways that you can prove to yourself that you can accomplish something. So higher than MMR, I think, is the ability to just develop the endurance to play StarCraft. This was the case for me whenever I first started out, and a lot of other people have said this. When you're first starting StarCraft 2 and you play for a match or two, you feel like you're sweating, you're overwhelmed. There's so much to do. I know I'm supposed to be doing way more than this, but geez Louise, I'm just exhausted. And they get really like mentally overwhelmed and kind of burnt out from that, because it's a super intense space.
Yes.
It's a space where you load into a game and there's more stuff to do than you can physically do. And that's life. That's a really good analogy for life. There's always so much that is available to you every day when you wake up, but you can only take a certain number of moves based on your momentum and speed and like your objectives and that kind of thing. So StarCraft, I think, in a sense, is a really good place to just test yourself and just to develop some aspect of improvement in speed and skill in a game where that's all relative to you. It's kind of like a person who wants to pick up running, where if you want to pick up running, you're most likely not going to try to get first place in the local city marathon. You just want to get off the couch. And how that process on its own is beautiful and it's unique to you, and you get to celebrate every victory along the way. So the first time you run 5K, that's a really big victory for you, and you can celebrate the shit out of that as you move on to the next sort of goalposts and stuff. So it's more about getting into an arena where you can see yourself fall and you can practice getting up again.
Then we mentioned something about even celebrating small wins. How would you celebrate that 5K win in StarCraft? How would you, like, winning your equivalency of winning your local, race in StarCraft? How would you celebrate a win?
I have a video of my first ever GM promotion where I'm like flipping around, and that was maybe one of the most exciting days of my life. But to a lesser extent, the first time I got Masters, I had one other person in the apartment at the time who was like my best friend's girlfriend, and she didn't play StarCraft, but she was vaguely aware of it. And I needed to tell her that I just got Masters in StarCraft, and I was like, super heckin' pumped about it. So I think it's all relative. Like even getting platinum for the first time feels pretty good. Like you want to share it with your friends that you got this achievement. It feels pretty amazing. I think because the promotions are pretty hard to obtain in StarCraft, it makes each of them really exciting. So you can treat yourself and maybe play some silly matches. But I guess the useful thing that I would point out is watching out for winner's tilt. Winner's tilt means that you've just had a ring of success or a run of success, and you want to avoid playing so that you keep the bank account and the poker sense at a good number and your MMR at a good number. Because you feel like, I think I'm on an upswing. I just want to set the account here. It looks pretty good. This is really nice for me. If I play, it's not going to go up most likely. And then you've stopped practicing. You've stopped getting into the arena once you've done that. And you're just kind of putting the picture up on the wall, so to speak, instead of like putting the gloves on and getting back into fighting.
I definitely am prone to that. I will be the first to admit. Definitely when you're winning, you're like, this is a good time to stop. Hold off on it just a little bit. I'm definitely prone to that. I'll be the first to admit it. Just for the last part on the idea of even small wins, because I'm really focused on what would be an example to you as a non-rank based victory that someone could set for themselves.
You could say a max out time. You don't even need a time, actually. You just want to get maxed. So setting a criteria for moral victory is a thing that I do for myself, especially when I'm having a C game day. A game is your top 15% of your performance. B game is the middle 70%. C game is the bottom 15. So you're playing like trash, and you're going to be losing most of your games. It feels horrible to lose 8 games in a row, but if you can recognize, I only slept 5 hours last night. There was something that came up in the morning. I'm in a pretty grumpy mood, and I'm playing like shit. All of that you can accept, and then you can boil that down into, I'm just going to try not to be supply blocked at 36 as a Zerg. And if that's your one goal, you make your overlord and you get up to that 44 supply ceiling, you say, I am victorious. And you're making progress in something that is a real hurdle in the match. And in the video game, you are improving. You're basically drilling something and saying that this is my emphasis. Yes, I am tired. Yes, I'm playing poorly, but I'm still learning and I'm still practicing. So criteria for moral victory is something that you can create for yourself. Anytime, you could do it when you're playing well also. I do this. Lately, I've been focusing on minimap awareness. So I'll just do my Tuesday tryhard stream and I'll say, I'm going to try to have fun, and I'm going to try to stare at the minimap as much as I can, because I know that relative to top Zergs like Sarah, Lambo, Raynor, I'm not looking at the minimap as much as they are. So if I'm just doing that, then I'm moving toward progress and improvement, even if I don't necessarily win. And that gives yourself a ton of, I would say, resilience when it comes to losing a match. Because if you lose a match and you had no criteria for moral victory, your entire goal was to win. And now you've just mowed the lawn, and now it's twice as high as it was before. And you're just so infuriated at this that you've been robbed of your MMR when you feel like you worked really hard and you deserve it.
Right.
But if you had that criteria of moral victory, say I did lose to that Protoss, but I did look at that minimap a lot. So I have grown and I have improved as a player, even though I lost MMR.
So it doesn't seem even if you've lost.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you write any of this stuff down? Like as you're doing it, do you write down maybe start of your day, find positives? Like, do you track these things?
No. I'm kind of like Tarzan. I'm not really a planner or a person who does spreadsheets. I would say Printf he's pretty far from me in terms of approaching the game. He thinks about it more like Legos, where he's like building the most pointy ouch Lego to put outside of his opponent's base, and they step on it and they die. And then sometimes they step around it, and he takes note of that, and then he sets up more Legos like in those spots. And all of that is sort of premeditated. My strats are usually opening up very solid and standard. I'll oftentimes use, say, Lambo's YouTube is amazing for me to learn from. I'll try to figure out what is a good gas timing, what is a good tech progression, and then I will play a whole bunch of games and then create some broader strategy emphasis for me. So I'm working on my minimap awareness, or I'm trying to hit my overseer scout, that kind of thing.
So you keep a lot of that more internally than the Printf style of print, like of of spreadsheets and data tables and whatnot?
On my Patreon, I do a samurai report every Tuesday where I talk about, this was my morning routine, this is how I felt leading into my matches, this is how my mindset was, this is the set of stuff that kind of tilted me throughout the session, this is how I detilted and how I kind of processed it. So I'll give kind of that almost a journal report of where I am, and then I post those all for free as public posts to the Patreon. So it's kind of like a window into my own like personal practice. That's probably the closest thing to what you're asking.
Yeah. Like, I'm guessing, obviously StarCraft related, you may not write down that stuff, but in terms of mentality, psychology, values, goals, do you keep that written somewhere, or is that also just internalized?
I have a book that I wrote about it a while back. I should probably do an audiobook of that. That would be pretty cool. But it's called The Path of Mastery, and it breaks down a lot of different aspects of improvement. We've talked about some of them in this conversation now, like winner's tilt and so on.
Is there a time that you really felt that your path that you've chosen was validated?
Yeah, actually. It was the last community summit that I think we went to, and it was the last one that they would have held. And we all got brought in this like theater projector room thing, and they were talking about some of the future of the game and that sort of thing.
I remember that.
And there was a slide pulled up that said "Be excellent to each other," and it had my picture on it, and I was like, "Damn!" Like that I got to be the symbol of being excellent to other people. I preach about that all the time. Like, I'm respect first with how people interact in the stream, and then in my WoW guild, whenever I recruit anyone, I say we're respect first. So if you do that, you'll be fine. But that was sort of me seeing that my mission had succeeded, and that I had made an impact, and people had noticed that was a major thing about me. And that's more important to me than Zerg, more important to me than whether I'm GM or not, is getting that message across that the way that we treat each other really matters, and it has a substantial impact on the community as a whole. And the StarCraft scene, if you compare it to the League and the Dota scene and the Overwatch scene, we have a culture of manner. There are a lot of people who value the GLHF and the GG, and they do that consistently. And that's pretty awesome. And it gives me a lot of hope too. A gaming scene can be good in the way that they treat each other. I guess the eye-opening thing for me growing up was seeing that other people oftentimes will be having a really tough time IRL, and the culture of like hazing and BMing people just to tilt them so they make mistakes and stuff, it has a real human cost. So as I kind of got into adulthood, and I noticed some people are carrying anxiety, depression, social issues that they have with their friends and family and all this kind of stuff, and they're going to play video games to kind of relax and unwind and chill for a little bit, and then there's someone who's screaming at them about how they're trash. Maybe you think it's funny, but it's really harmful to them, and you're just putting another, basically a rock in their huge satchel that they're carrying with all this weight. It's not worth it. It's really not worth it. I thought it was cool to be the edgy, toxic gamer when I was growing up, until I noticed that some people do carry real pain and real trauma on a regular basis. And if you are righteous and respectful to them, that oftentimes encourages and emboldens them. And we're a social species on the planet, so our success is very much hinging upon working as a group and being good to each other. Even if it's an anonymous person who you'll never see again, that's still a person. And the way that you treat them really matters.
Does that mean then you rule out mind games in competition?
Oh, mind games are great. You can be a talker. Like, I would say you can be a jackal without being necessarily really despicable and evil. Like, you can say witty and goofy stuff in a way that gets your opponent to think a certain way, and then you end up using a certain kind of build. One of the common ones that I wouldn't really say is BM, but is definitely a psychological tactic that works, is when you feign incapacity. So an opponent will queue against me, and they'll be like, "Oh, why did I get Neuro? Oh, you're just gonna crush me." And they make a big fuss about it, and then they destroy me. That's a psychological tactic, because they act like, "Oh, I don't even know why the matchmaking system gave me you as an opponent. Like, I don't stand a chance." But they know a build that they practiced 4,000 times, and it's pretty good, and it's dangerous, and then they kill me with it, and then I feel dumb. So it's that kind of wordplay where everything that you say does have an impact in your opponent's mindset. I do think that banter is valid. Banter is really fun. I get in voice with Up a Tree Zelda on Thursdays a lot of the time, and we'll we'll ladder together, and you can kind of joke with each other about the mistakes that you're making and that kind of thing. So there's definitely a lot of room for playful banter. I'm not like a no fun allowed, you can only GLHF and GG. Yeah, you can meme about. That's fine.
If you could change one thing in StarCraft, one thing, had a magic wand, and it was so all powerful that there was no boundaries. You could change one thing about StarCraft, and you only get one thing about StarCraft. It can be in-game, outer game, culturally, developer-wise, anything. What would that be?
It's a big one. I have a couple things that pop
They always
into my
do,
head.
but you only get one.
I would say the watch tab in the StarCraft client.
Ooh.
Because that would make it more community self-sustaining. That would basically give the community people a bridge to consistently add new stuff to the game. Like you can put the latest tournaments in there, which benefits them. You could put the latest like loco guide in there because that benefits the content creators. And it's also one of the ways that you can kind of bridge the gap of learning a really difficult game. You can't really explain all of StarCraft 2 and macro strats and micro and all this in just a tutorial. So being able to have more stuff in there, I think that was an idea that was toyed around with in the past, but didn't make it all the way through.
Yeah, definitely mentioned at the summit a couple of times, I feel.
Yeah, but I feel like that would be a pretty like long-standing, powerful addition to it.
Bringing it down to the end of it, who would you like to shout at? Who would you like to pay respects to? Who do you look towards?
I would say the first name that comes to mind is a fellow streamer, Apoptosis808. He is
fun guy.
Yeah, he's what I would consider a new blood in the StarCraft scene, where he is kind of pursuing his road to partner right now, and he's doing StarCraft as his main thing. So anyone who's like worried about the fate and future of StarCraft, there are people who are getting started in this stuff, and he's just moved over here to Seattle. I helped him stay for a week or so before he got his place set up, but he is the dungeon master of our Wayfarers D&D campaign, and he's been fighting his way through Masters Leagues on the ladder. And going through that move from Hawaii to Seattle is pretty massive. He's got his stream back up and running and that kind of thing, but really, really talented content creator, awesome charisma, and he's been improving really fast at the game. He's very good at analysis and just going from if he loses the game right into the replay and figuring out what went on, which is great for both himself and the viewer to get a sense of the game. Also, Pig, if I'm on this run of shouting out the people in the D&D campaign, he's also in our campaign, and he's doing a subathon right now. The hustle involved in this is incredible. He has a setup where if you gift a certain number of subs or donate a certain amount, he'll keep the stream going. And I think he's been going at this for more than a week.
I heard his camera's watching him while he's sleeping. Is that?
Yeah. You're allowed to do that on Twitch. They changed the TOS. It used to be against terms of service, but now you can do that if you set your stream to no category.
I'm not brave enough to do that, but you know, shoutouts to Pig. Thank you so much, Neuro, for being my guest today.